Welcome. Just imagine that you were the person who was carrying that large pane of glass. It fell and shattered at your feet, and you're looking at it in dismay, very discouraged. You see all the scattered, sharp pieces. You cannot put it together. But as you're looking, suddenly you start to smile because you notice something. You have begun to look at the spaces between the scattered pieces and suddenly realize that, as a matter of fact, you can build something new with the scattered glasses. I'm Dr. Frank Douglas, the CEO of Safe Haven Dialogues and the host of Reframing for Resilience. Here we discuss difficult issues that we may face in life, like discrimination or being marginalized or facing bias. And we explore with our guests their experience, their expertise in ways that they have looked at new ways or different ways to solve problems. How have they reframed? What did they do, either personally or the advice they gave to individuals to help them to flex their resilience muscle? Welcome. Our guest today is Ms. Allison Mairena, and she's the VP of People at New Globe. Allison, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
And it's a delight to have you. I am actually, waiting, as they say, with bated breath to really understand what you do. I know that you are responsible for onboarding and in Sub-Sahara and India. I know that you also have worked in China, and your background is actually education, and that is your love. So tell us a little bit about Allison and
Sure.
the journey that you took to becoming VP of People.
Certainly. So yeah, I didn't wake up one day and was like, oh man, let me go and lead an HR team. It kind of fell into my lap. So I went to Florida State University and studied Italian and business with a minor in Mandarin, thinking at the time, okay, well, this will allow me to get a foot in the door for opportunities to be an interpreter. And I am an extreme extrovert who thought it would be really cool to get paid to just talk to people, and it would be just talking in a different language. However, as I graduated, I realized that my Mandarin was not quite up to par where someone was going to necessarily pay me for my interpretation or translation skills yet. And so I moved to Beijing and became an English teacher and fell in love with education that way, and wasn't my original, kind of career path, but found that it was one that really aligned with my aspirations. However, at the end of my first year of teaching, someone had mentioned that there was an opening in the teacher recruitment and training team. And so I threw my name in the ring for that role, and I got the position, which relocated me from Beijing to Shanghai. And that was really my first kind of true HR role, but still with the same company, which happens to have their North American base here in Cambridge, Massachusetts, where I've resided for the past 10 years. So relocated still with that company 10 years ago to their US headquarters, and continue to work my way up to become a senior recruiter within that team, and have held various talent acquisition and HR roles since then at a variety of ed tech, health tech, and fam tech, short for family tech, which is an industry. It's a little bit more niche than what folks have heard, but basically at that company, we used analytics to match families together to share a Montessori trained nanny. So that was really cool. But all really focused on making some kind of social impact. And so most recently, about a year and a half ago, I was able to join the team at New Globe. So we are partnering with innovative governments at the federal and state level, predominantly across sub-Saharan Africa and India, to bring technology and curriculum into public school classrooms. So although I don't get the privilege of molding young minds like I used to, I'm still able to make that impact for sure in my role leading the people function there. So everything from onboarding to benefits, compensation, everything under the HR umbrella, minus recruiting, as that is a separate department for us.
I'd like to get a sense of, as you've lived in China and you deal with different cultures now, Sub-Sahara and India, what observations do you have about how, if there are any differences, that you have noted that some of the other cultures deal with these types of people-related problems, Madam VP of People?
Yeah, well, so Kim Rower, who is a co-founder of Peak HR, recommended this book on a panel, gosh, maybe about a year and a half ago or so. And it's called The Culture Map by Erin Meyer. And oh my gosh, 10 out of 10 recommend. It's so good to just hear more about. And Erin is a professor at a major international business school based in Paris, but she is originally from, I want to say Minneapolis, but somewhere in that area. She is American. And I have been able to leverage that book and kind of prove a lot of what has been in there to see what I have observed working and living in China, and now with New Globe working with folks across 9 different countries that have dramatically different cultures than my own home country of the US. I can say that, yes, it is quite different. I think in particular, communication is one that very much sticks out. On the communication scale, it's important to remember that some cultures have high context. So if you look at, for example, Japan, right? In Japan, they're an island society with a pretty homogenous population with thousands of years of shared history, while conversely, the US is a melting pot, right? And we've only been around for a couple hundred years. And so most of the folks are immigrants from all over the world. And so we would be considered low context. And so when communicating with my peers in the US office, right, oftentimes what's considered, quote unquote, good, clear communication in our culture tends to be very precise and sometimes considered a little blunt. Whereas, and I'm happy to share a short anecdote of some feedback that I received when I was working in China, actually. China being a high context culture, high context communication, or good communication in a high context culture is more nuanced and layered. And you're thinking about some of the messaging that isn't necessarily spoken, but kind of read between the lines, if you will. And when I transitioned from Beijing to Shanghai, I had moved from being a teacher to being a recruiter in an office setting. And some of the feedback that I had received was because I had been so programmed for the past, year of projecting and using a teacher voice that sometimes I was coming off as like a little bossy or like too directive.
In a hierarchical type, how do you get people to get the input and the collaboration of their peers and co-workers.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you're looking at the blend of the egalitarian and hierarchical cultures, a lot of it can come down to decision making, right? And so on the threshold of discussion versus point of decision versus implementation, you might want to have enough discussion on the front end with not only peers, but perhaps direct reports, maybe some skip level if you're trying to take what is currently hierarchical and make it, a little bit more egalitarian, get some more of that buy-in, not just from the leadership level, but elicit ideas from those others within the greater team before then, still probably having the leader make the ultimate call on the decision to be made, right? And then afterwards with the implementation, you should hopefully still be open to revisiting or altering that decision in the event that you didn't make the right call, right? Whereas, in a strictly hierarchical culture, obviously it's kind of my way or the highway. But I think that by breaking that decision point into more of like the halfway there point, as opposed to in a hierarchical culture, it'll be like, okay, so I've talked, maybe a peer or two, I've made this decision, now let's implement it, right? Instead, flipping that so that way you're pushing out the decision a little bit until you've had the chance to really appropriately discuss some of those options. And then also being open to, revisiting that and pivoting in the event that it didn't quite work out.
So, in closing, what would you say are the three key things that you have learned thus far on your journey through these various cultures, uh, through being an educator on the bench, as I like to to say, uh, to being a leader of educators and those who use technologies of educators. What are the three things that you have learned in dealing with stress?
Well, number one, control the controllables. Number two, I would say ultimately seek to understand, whether that is understanding your own reaction or understanding why this is happening. And then third, I would say knowing when to ask for help is also very, very key, because you're never going to be able to do it all. And there's only so many hours in a day. And burnout is a very real thing. So, being mindful of the time that you have to achieve something and taking, quote unquote, inventory of the team that you have to lean in on a bit, make sure that you're paying attention of when you are not necessarily being the greatest at raising your hand and saying like, hey, I actually am overwhelmed by the volume of tasks or uh the hardness of the task. I'm not thinking of the appropriate word that I want to use here. Difficulty. There we go. Took me a second, but and noting that that time investment may vary based on the task itself. So asking for help is also important.